following is a special presentation of HBO's Sports of the 20th Century.
He takes me on this car ride, right? He says he wants to ask me a key question. I want to know, when you sit down in the theater and the lights go off and the movie comes on, what's the first goddamn thing you see? He says, all right, I'll tell you how it's supposed to start. It's a fighter plane from the pilot's eye, and it's flying over Korea, Seoul. And it's flying slow and sunny, and then bang, wham, boom! I mean, the biggest goddamn explosion you ever saw on the screen. And then it goes dark. Dark! For maybe 10 seconds, there's nothing. And then when it comes back, there's the ballpark. And the crowd roaring. And that's how it's supposed to begin.
Though decades have passed since he took his final swing, the immense shadow of Ted Williams lingers within the storied walls of this ballpark and beyond. He wanted it that way. Williams arrived here with an ambition splendid but simple: to have them say he was the greatest hitter that ever lived. But a legacy that big could not be defined so easily. His life began in a small house in the North Park neighborhood of San Diego, California.
He had no home life, really. He was a first latchkey kind of kid. He had a father that had kind of become absent and a mother who had thrown herself into the Salvation Army. And it was kind of ironic that his mother was off saving everybody else's soul and wasn't around to really take care of her kids. I think he had a very strange relationship with his mother, feelings about his mother that she'd kind of let him down.
My mother was strictly Salvation Army, strictly non-family, a wonderful woman in so many ways, but I wouldn't want to be married to a gal like that. The house was dirty, and Jesus, I hated it.
There were two Williams boys, Teddy and younger brother Danny, born to Mexican-American Mae Venzer and her husband Sam Williams, a photographer. With both parents away so much of the time, the boys spent many days and nights of their childhood alone.
Both my father and Ted, went their own ways. And I think, Ted wanted to work within the rules and my father wanted to rebel against them.
His brother Danny, younger, became kind of a street tough kid and got in the assorted problems that unmanaged kids get into. But Ted found baseball, and that was his structure.
It was the most fun I ever had in my life. If I was hitting a ball and I could hit one, bow, just like that. And gee, that felt good to me.
I think Ted was totally self-motivated. The baseball field where he played, it's right there by the house. If you just went over there with your bat and glove, you could get something going.
And he would play baseball year-round. He didn't fool around with the other sports. He was swinging a broomstick all the time. He was swinging. They said he never had a girlfriend. Baseball was his whole deal.
Williams emerged as a huge high school star, and then, even before graduating, became a member of the local Pacific Coast League team, the Padres.
He'd come out to my folks' place and have dinner. And my dad had a way of talking to Ted. See, Ted didn't have any home life at all, and nobody had ever give him any feeling of confidence or anything. And he just said, "You're lucky to have a dad like that."
He was old school. He was a Depression-era kid, and you didn't talk about your troubles. You know, Ted would just say, it was full of troubles at home. And that was that.
Williams was signed by the Red Sox as a teenager. And after a brief stint in the minors, the highly touted rookie arrived in Boston in the spring of 1939.
When he first came up, there was a lot of talk about him, and he was a skinny kid from San Diego. But Ted had a lot of publicity before he got to the major leagues, and we were all looking for him.
They wouldn't be disappointed. The kid, as he became known, belted 31 home runs and led the league with 145 runs batted in. Baseball had its newest star. Boston, its newest hope.
See, when he first went up, gosh, he hit home runs, and when he'd go back out in right field, they'd all clap for him to come out there, and he'd take his cap and hold it straight up in the air. He wanted to please everybody, and he didn't want any objections like booing or anything.
If there'd been a Rookie of the Year award, he would have won it. So the Red Sox are really excited about having this wonderful ball player now, and they rashly go off and retool the ballpark. Right field used to have staggering proportions, and they bring everything in about 20 feet so Ted can hit more home runs. And they moved Ted to left field because it's an easier field to play. And there was a little bit of resentment. You know, here's this guy just about old enough to vote, and they've done all this for him.
Ted was very brash and very bold. He knew how good he was. And he was playing at a time when all the papers were going and going hard. You know, afternoon editions churning out every day. The Red Sox were the top dog, the #1 story in town. That's what sold papers, that was the sport. He walked right smack dab into that.
And as a result, when they had somebody like Ted Williams that they could dig into, they were doing it quite liberally from the beginning.
And he became, very quickly, the lightning rod of the city. He cast that image of the tough Boston press forever.
From the start, the criticism was personal. Like when one Boston paper learned Williams was spending his first off-season in Minnesota, hunting and fishing with his girlfriend Doris Sewell.
The worst thing that was written was by a guy named Harold Keza, who wrote, what kind of guy, you know, wouldn't go home and see his mother. And Ted forever hated that comment.
In his second season, Williams' home run total dipped to 23, disappointing the demanding Boston faithful. Frustrated and already embittered, Williams lashed out.
Of course, the fans are almost over the top of him, and it didn't take but 1 or 2 fans to start riding him, and then a lot of them started getting on him, and then that's what upset him pretty bad.
When fans started booing him after he didn't hit, you know, more home runs, he said, Boston's a lousy town anyways. I'd rather play in New York. Well, that sealed it. They were after him from then on.
He was fueled by negativity. He stopped tipping the cap somewhere in that second season. It kind of set up his love-hate relationship with the fans. He liked to show the world. He liked to put a chip on his shoulder and say, I'll show those sons of bitches.
I'm sure in my own mind that it was the immaturity of me to start with as a young player. Seeing I was getting too much involved in controversial things or reacting too strongly against some of the things that were written. And I think things like that developed to the point where I really did make some enemies.
The remarkable thing about Williams was that he could keep his talent intact and moving along no matter what happened around it. I think he was that way from the very beginning.
There were things he was insecure about, but there was one thing he wasn't confused about, which was that he could hit the goddamn ball.
There were
two dominant sports personalities in the United States. One was Joe DiMaggio, one was Ted Williams, and they dominated the sports pages, no question about it.
By the middle of the 1941 baseball season, Joe DiMaggio's hit streak, 48 games and counting, was the biggest story in sports. Ted Williams' more modest streak of 23 games had ended in June, though he was hitting above the magical 400 mark.
Ted was thought to be the pure hitter. Joe was thought to be the all-around perfect ball player. He could hit, he could field, he could throw, he could run.
It's hard for people today, I think, to understand the way those two were viewed. We've got heroes today, and we've got great hitters and great fielders, but these two men stood out.
In an era when the All-Star game was as big as anything in sports, at the Midsummer Classic in Detroit, the pair teamed up in the same outfield for the American League.
Joe DiMaggio came up in the ninth inning. We were trailing 5-3, and we had men on base. And then DiMaggio hit what should have been a double play. The throw to first base pulled the first baseman off. DiMaggio was safe.
The play brought up Williams. If DiMaggio had missed a chance to write a perfect ending, Williams was eager for his.
How do you like this for a setting? 2 out. The tying run at third, the winning run at first, last half of the ninth inning, and the 400 hitter of today at the plate, Ted Williams.
The one that hit me the most emotionally, was only because of the circumstances of being a young player, doing something for the first time in front of the greatest audience at the time that I'd ever played before, because it was an all-star game.
Russell pitches, Williams swings, there's a high drive, going deep, it is a home run.
And hitting that home run at 41, and that was complete elation. Happiness, jumping up and down, and, you know, boom, boom, boom. You remember other home runs, other hits, you know, but hit me the best, the heaviest.
Joe DiMaggio's hit streak ended on July 17th at 56 games. The Yankees would coast to the pennant. But in September, the attention again turned to Williams. He was leading the league in home runs, contending for a Triple Crown, and still batting .400. But on the road in Philadelphia, the final weekend of the season, his average dropped.
I walked all over Philadelphia that night worrying about not hitting 400, really.
There was a doubleheader the last day of the season. He was at 3.996. And the manager, Joe Cronin, told him that he didn't have to play.
Cronin, operating under the assumption that statistics were always rounded off, believed Williams already had his .400 season.
Cronin told him, you can be a .400 hitter if you want to stay out. Ted said, no way, he wanted to play.
And I thought, well, geez, what's he talking about? I said, I'm going to play.
He said, if I'm a .400 hitter, I want to be a .400 hitter all the way through.
In the first game, Williams went 4 for 5, raising his average to .404.
It was a great thrill when he finally did hit that .400 mark. And they weren't cheap hits. I mean, he was just so good.
And he wasn't finished. He played the second game as well, finishing 6 for 8 on the day and .406 on the season. Several weeks later, Joe DiMaggio was named the American League's most valuable player.
I think Ted thought that Joe was a great player and an unhappy man. And Joe was terribly jealous of Ted. Joe was furious that Ted was the one who had hit .400 and not him. DiMaggio spent his life trying to be the hero we wanted him to be. Ted would never do that. Ted was supposed to be the terrible Ted, the problem child, the brat. But actually, Ted was a very generous soul and great to his fellow players.
In fact, Williams counted Dom DiMaggio, Joe's younger brother, among his closest clubhouse friends, along with shortstop Johnny Pesky and his old Pacific Coast League teammate, Bobby Doerr.
He was just a really true friend. He would do anything in the world for you. And everybody on the ball club liked Ted. He's the type of fellow that draws attention. It seems like if he walked into the room, if there was 15 people in there, within 4 or 5 minutes, they'd all be around Ted.
I thought he was the almighty when I first got there. Of course, I was the third man in. He used to make fun of me once in a while. And he'd call me by my Christian name, but he didn't even pronounce it right. He'd say, Johnny Pavaskovich, huh? He said, what is that, a disease?
He lived like the kid that he wanted to be from the start. He hung out with a clubhouse guy. He lived almost like a small towner in Boston.
He didn't go out to dinner with a lot of ball players. He wasn't a big carouser, but he collected a bunch of people that he came across, you know, ordinary people who he became closest to.
The crowd was cabbies and firemen and guys he'd met on the street, and none of the nabobs of Boston was invited. He didn't like people who thought they were something great and maybe thought he wasn't.
When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a baseball player, and we didn't have television then. We just had magazines. And I used to read about Ted Williams, and because he was left-handed, and I was left-handed, because he was from Southern California, and I was, because as I learned more about him, he grew up in a neighborhood very similar to mine, I just made a connection to him in my head. And I thought he had just an incredible swing. I tried to pattern my swing after his, but from looking at pictures. And the more I learned about him, the more I realized that he was a scientific hitter with just incredible natural ability.
Anticipation. You see a fastball and your eye-hand coordination isn't quite good enough. You gotta say fastball and start in that area. So you anticipate what's gonna go on. Up, there it is, bam.
Ted just brought a passion to hitting a baseball that I don't think Boston had seen, or maybe anybody had seen. Nobody had deconstructed that simple act the way he had.
When he talked about baseball, it was like water coming out of the river.
In the batter's box, he was like a scientist.
He knew why the curveball curved, and he knew brains in the bat.
And he made a study of the pitchers. He knew more about every pitcher in the league than they knew about themselves.
Trying to sneak a fastball by Ted Williams was like trying to sneak a sunbeam by a rooster in the morning. It's not going to happen.
He did things in his head that they do now in computers.
And the scientific mind, together with the physical abilities, the touch, the feel, he had to the utmost.
He used to take his bats to the post office and weigh them to make sure they hadn't gained an ounce of moisture. He didn't have to look a certain way. He didn't have to have shined shoes. He didn't wear a tie. But on the ball field, in the batter's box, nothing was beyond or beneath his notice. He had to be perfect.
But 2 months after the 1941 season ended, his pursuit of that perfection was threatened by war.
December 7th came, and there were a bunch of guys in baseball, Bob Feller at the head of the list, who went right down and joined the services. And, you know, those were the gung-ho guys. And Ted wanted to play another season. He was classified 3A because he was supposed to be sole support of his mother. But he hadn't seen his mother in 2 years, and it was all looking a little shaky. He tried to deny it, but that gave more fodder to the press that he was dodging the draft.
I don't think Ted was a draft dodger. I think he probably wanted to continue his baseball career. What his thoughts was, I really don't know. I never discussed it with him. But I know my thoughts, and I thought the right thing to do was to get busy and fight.
Williams won the Triple Crown in 1942, but it would be his final season on the diamond for some time. He enrolled in Naval Flight School in November. The great hitter soon developed into a great pilot. And perhaps surprisingly, the ornery star took to the military life like a natural.
The truth is, he was a very structured person, and in fact, thrived on being structured. He never had a problem with anybody over him, never had a problem with an officer.
When I was at pre-flight school at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with the war getting going, I just had signed up as a young guy. I was 18. Ted came there to Chapel Hill, and we all standing around watching it to pre-flight. And he just electrified everything he did. Coordination, you know, is important in flying. You got to get the feel of the airplane, and he had that down cold.
Williams spent 3 years in the service, eventually becoming a flight school instructor, but never seeing combat. He also found time during the war to marry longtime girlfriend Doris Sewell. By the time he returned to the Red Sox in 1946, he was a more mature 27 years old. And the new, friendlier Ted Williams was a hit with the Boston press and fans alike.
He was the big guy, and he had that air about him that would stop a whole stadium in its tracks. He was impossible not to watch.
He was marvelous. I mean, everybody would get a thrill when Ted Williams came out.
We just got off to a good start. We got out 10, 12 games, and it seemed like we stayed that way all season. We just had a ball club that seemed like it molded together.
The past 3 weeks, Ted has maintained a savage hitting pace. He is leading the league in home runs with 27. He is hitting .351.
Williams was rocketing line drives into right field, doing his part to keep Boston atop the American League. But just after the All-Star break, a strange new idea coming out of Cleveland threatened to derail him.
They had the Ted Williams shift, which Lou Boudreau, our manager, developed. Everybody played on the right side of the field.
Well, I was almost embarrassed because I thought, what are they trying to do, make a joke out of this thing? But little did I realize that this was going to be an obstacle for me, and it was.
That was the knock about him, that he would never hit the ball to left field and take advantage of the shift.
And my gosh, Ted would not go out of that strike zone. People said, well, he'd help the club better if he hit a ball out of the strike zone to get that run in. Ted said, well, if I start doing that, I'll create bad habits.
The seemingly inflexible approach offered more fodder to his critics, who argued that the best hitter in the game could swing at a less than perfect pitch for the sake of helping his team score runs. Still, Williams did foil the shift at a key moment. On September 13th, he hit a ball to left field for a game-winning inside-the-park home run, clinching Boston's first pennant in 28 years. They had nearly 3 weeks to wait for the World Series. But once again, nothing would come easy for Williams and the Sox.
The manager was worried that the Red Sox would be stale by the time the World Series came, so he set up an exhibition series against the purported stars of the American League, including Joe DiMaggio. But Williams gets hit with a pitch in the elbow, and he was never really right, I don't think, for the World Series.
Against Stan Musial and the Cardinals, the series went the full 7 games. But St. Louis prevailed, and Williams was a disappointment.
He got shut down. Nothing but singles, hits 200. It's a pathetic showing. To the day he died, I think that really grated on him, and there was no answer for it.
It was just a sad thing because we were favored to win the series and we didn't. Ted Williams actually wept. He didn't have a real good series, but you know, he got us there.
I couldn't believe that I'd been so lousy. I was kind of shell-shocked to think we'd lost. God, I was so completely upset. And I remember I just broke down and started crying. Right then, you know, it just hit me so hard.
The whole idea that this was his moment to shine just went right by the boards. Little did he know that this would be his only chance.
After the season, Williams was awarded his first MVP. and in the years to come would win another, as well as a second Triple Crown and 4 more batting titles. But he would never again step to the plate in a World Series. In 1948, the Red Sox lost a 1-game playoff to Cleveland.
The ball game is over. The Indians win. The ball game 8-3 on the American League pennant. Tommy Harris and the Yankees win the pennant.
And the following year ended even more painfully for Boston. Needing just one more win, the Sox lost the last 2 games of the season to their arch rivals in Yankee Stadium. Joe DiMaggio would earn yet another World Series ring. He'd ultimately own 9, which only added to the criticism that Ted Williams could not even win 1.
There was this whole situation of could Ted perform in the clutch, and in the running battle with Joe DiMaggio, that's where Ted lost the most, because the Yankees were racking up all these pennants, and Ted was never getting to that stage.
Joe made everybody winners. I think Ted made a lot of people better hitters and made some better pitchers. But Joe was just, he was insufferable on the subject. He said, you know, sure he can hit, he'd say, but what has he ever won?
All the stuff that he was great was individual stuff, you know, hitting 400, Triple Crowns. Even his great moments like All-Star games. And that's not the reputation you want to have. You don't want to be known as a great guy in All-Star games. You want to be great in the World Series.
As his team's frustrations continued, Williams' penchant for shrinking away in his personal life became more noticeable. In January of 1948, his wife Doris gave birth to a daughter, Bobby Joe, and Williams missed the birth.
He was down in Florida in the Keys fishing, and it was a number of days before he finally got up to see his daughter.
His excuse was that the baby was premature. Well, but he also went back and fished, because that's what he wanted to do.
The way everybody in Boston lived so intimately with him, it just caused a great uproar. I think he loved Bobby Joe, but he had big problems with intimacy, I think. He had big problems with day-to-day life.
Ted had his own way of sort of retreating from those times when he might have been wrong about something or wasn't quite sure that he was right. And what happened in those times was that he almost disappeared into his own little world.
Williams remained comfortable, though, in the batter's box, winning his second MVP award in 1949. But soon his career was again interrupted by war, as the U.S. entered the conflict in Korea, and the Marines fighting there quickly discovered they were in dire need of some air support.
From 1945 to 1950, they didn't train any pilots at all. And suddenly, all of a sudden, hey, there are no pilots, what are we going to do? So they went into the reserves, which I was one, as Ted was.
They would go to the file cabinet, they pull out the list and take off the dust, and there's Ted Williams, and he's called to go back.
And in 1950, I guess it was, he ran into the fence at Comiskey Park and broke his elbow. You know, he said, gee, I don't know about my, it's not doing too well. I could still see the doctor patch it to, okay, you're all right. There was no way that Williams was going to get out and go back into the Marines. You know, he was, I guess, 6 years older than I was. And it was harder for him to get into this mode.
A bunch of time had passed since World War II, and Ted Williams hadn't flown one plane since he left the service. And now they're called to fly jets that none of them knew how to fly.
After spending nearly the entire 1952 season retraining in flight school, Williams landed for duty in Korea in February 1953.
The life in Korea was miserable. I mean, he was sick, it was cold. He had to keep flying because they didn't have enough pilots. I mean, literally, he was bleeding out of his ears.
Williams began flying combat missions just after his arrival. And in one of his first runs, his plane found enemy fire.
So I'm up about 18,000 feet now, and I felt like any minute I'm going to have to bail out of this son of a bitch. So all of a sudden, this plane right behind me, little Lieutenant Hawkins, young kid, He led me back to field, and in the meantime, he's calling in, telling that, you know, he has a plane with him that's smoking.
All the Marines are in the air. And all of a sudden you hear this, I got a mayday, I got a mayday. Now, we don't know who this is, but he's your brother. He's one of you. And you feel for this guy. Who is this guy?
Big explosion in the plane. And all this fire and smoke was underneath me, see? I didn't have my brakes, didn't have my wheels down. And I had nothing to slow me down. All I'm thinking about is getting on the deck. And I never will forget, as I was coming in, I'm on fire, 30 feet of fire going up behind my ass, see? And I hit the runway, and I skidded 1 mile up the runway. So I was really coming in fast. And I'm saying to myself, when is this dirty son of a bitch going to stop? That's all I said. When is this dirty son of a bitch? And if I ever prayed in my life, the only goddamn thing I said, well, if there's a goddamn Christ, it's the time old Teddy Ballgame needs you.
But he landed on the stomach of the plane, and why he didn't blow up, I'll never know. It's a miracle.
Having completed serving his country for the second time in the Marine Air Corps, Ted Williams once again prepares to return to play baseball.
Ted, I understand that your future address is Fenway Park. Is that correct?
Well, as of now, that's where I'm scheduled to go, Colonel. I plan on being up there tomorrow, and needless to say, I'm anxious to see if I can still hit.
He hadn't had a bat in his hand, you know, since he had been away. It was a Friday night before a game with the Detroit Tigers, I remember, and I went down because I wanted to see this. So all of a sudden, here he comes, right into the batting cage. Then Ted hits one out. Then hits the next pitch out. Then hits the next pitch out. The Red Sox are watching it, and they're going nuts. And Schreiber, the pitcher, is starting to get into it too. And Williams is screaming at him, throw it, don't watch it, throw it. All the while he's hitting his home runs, blood's coming down his hands. And finally he hit, there had to be 10 or 11, I think they're in a row. And people ask me, what is the greatest thing you ever seen Ted Williams do in a ball field? And they're surprised when I say, well, how about batting practice?
What do you think of Ted Williams?
I think he's a great ball player, and I hope he stays on a couple of more years.
You do, huh?
Yes.
Well, I think he will stay a couple more years with Boston. You coming to see every game he's on?
Yes, I hope so.
Fine, it's nice to hear that.
Williams would return to hit .407 in 37 games at the end of that 1953 season. He was now suddenly the oldest, longest tenured member of the team. Gone were his close clubhouse friends Dom DiMaggio, Bobby Doerr, and Johnny Pesky. Gone, too, was the prime of his career. The man who wanted to be the greatest hitter ever had lost 5 years of at-bats to 2 wars.
He was 34 years old, and you get a mixed sense of how he felt. On the one hand, I don't think he would give anything for those 39 missions over North Korea. But on the other, I think that it robbed him of some of his career. I think that the whole of his career after Korea was almost an anticlimax. He became much more conscious of his figures, how many hits in a record book, how many home runs. And in retrospect, I think that he felt like that's no way to go through your last years.
There was change to grapple with in his personal life as well. After years of long absences from his wife Doris, his marriage ended in divorce in 1955. She would maintain custody of 7-year-old daughter Bobby Jo. Meanwhile, as the struggling team's elder statesman, his prickly tendencies became as familiar to writers as his line drives.
He could be very antagonistic to the poor souls who covered the team every day, and he could be very profane and question their ancestries and their mothers. And he was the best cursor in the history of the human race. When he said, "God damn it," he meant that God should damn it. You know, I mean, it wasn't just like a little paprika in his speech.
He cussed at everything. He was never happy. He probably was the smartest, unhappiest player I ever saw.
You know, he'd be sitting in the locker room. The writer would walk in, and he'd go, What is it? What is that? Something stink in here?
But he says, I smell something. There must be a writer around here.
Oh, well, it's you. Well, it's no wonder with that shit you wrote. I mean, intimidating? I guess so. He meant to be intimidating.
It was an off day. I was up in the left field grandstand, and I hear bang, 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 bang. And I look out the right field, and Billy Goodman was Red Sox player, was out, and he's picking up these dead pigeons and putting them in a bag. And there's himself, bang, bang. In those days, Fenway Park was full of pigeons. You sat in the stands, you got in danger of the pigeon. So he was doing a favor for the Red Sox, shooting the pigeons. So I called the office to tell them Williams is up there shooting pigeons, because I didn't want it. What am I going to go down and interview him? He's shooting the pigeons. So my boss called the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Pigeons and nailed Williams in the act of shooting the pigeons, and he got fined. And he still doesn't know it, and I hope he never will, that I'm the guy who blew the whistle on him, because he never would have talked to me again, I know that.
Baseball history is made in Boston as Ted Williams sits down with owner Tom Yawkey of the Red Sox for a heart-to-heart talk.
Williams was paid a reported $100,000 salary in 1956. But the money didn't curb his frustrations, which peaked in August in a particularly unseemly outburst at Fenway.
They were playing the Yankees, and he dropped a pop fly, and people were booing him when he was coming in from the outfield, and he'd spit at everybody.
He jumped up in the air and went, "Phew!" Spit at the press box. I thought that was a highlight.
A guy throws like a golf ball from the stands, and Ted hawks a big spit at the guy, and people are booing, and I think he thrived on that secretly.
Of course, they never booed the Maggio. They never booed Willie Mays. They never made the guys you rate on his level. They didn't have to go through what he went through. Fenway Park is right on top of you, the fans are. And they're rabid fans, win or lose. Of course, he was a tempestuous guy, and as soon as he reacted to it, that's it. He never should have.
The next night, they were playing, I think, the Orioles, and he hit a home run. And as he's coming across the plate, everybody's, of course, looking at him, the writers, the fans, what's he going to do now? And as he crossed the plate, he took his right hand and he clamped it over his mouth, as if, boy, better not say anything, you know. The little boy in him, you know, coming across the plate. And the place went wild. They loved it.
What he wanted from the fans, and the reason that he had such trouble in Boston, he wanted people to feel with him. Whatever it was, his pride, his rage, his exultation, his shame. But if they wouldn't feel that, then there was his scorn. And he'd make them feel that.
The thing that has irritated me more over the years than anything else has been the fact that untruth's written about me in the paper. And it just irks me and irritates me so much that I just explode at times and possibly do things that I later wish I hadn't have done.
The irony of Ted is that with all the fights that he had with sports writers and the alienation he felt, he was probably as accessible as any athlete that came through. He got hooked in early with the Jimmy Fund charity, and he would go all over the place for the Jimmy Fund.
Can you think of anything more dreadful than a child sick with cancer? Here at the Jimmy Fund building, a highly trained staff of dedicated men and women devote their lives caring for children.
Boy, he was great, and we fell in line with him.
He went to a lot of hospitals to see kids that were hurt, and never turned anybody down on anything like that.
They had an event for the Jimmy Fund. It was one of the 3 or 4 times Ted wore a necktie in Boston, and he came out for this, and only because people were going to pony up dough for the Jimmy Fund. And he gave this tremendous speech about how, you know, all the bombs in the world won't do as much as a hand dropping a coin into the Jimmy Fund container. And that sense of unfairness, that's what brought him to it, I think. It just wasn't fair for a kid to have to battle this.
I think that Ted appreciated what that meant. Because let's face it, the wonder of the world when you're a kid is diminished a lot when you grow old and much more cynical. And I think that he did appreciate childhood so much. The Kid.
The Kid turned 39 years old in 1957, but finished the season with a remarkable .388 average, easily beating out younger stars like Mickey Mantle for the league title. Although the Sox remained a mediocre ball club, in 1959, they finally joined the rest of baseball and called up their first African-American player. But when it came to Pumpsy Green, black and white didn't matter to Ted Williams.
And you walk in the clubhouse and everybody take a look at you, and you can understand why. In other words, what's this black guy doing walking in here? I was his warm-up partner. He liked warming up with me, and I liked warming up with him too, because I'd burn him out every once in a while, because he always talked about how great he was. So I said, I got a better arm than you, and I did have, you know. He was all right around me, and, you know, he was number 9. He's Ted Williams. He didn't have to do anything to impress anybody.
That year, the man who yearned to be immortal finally faced signs of mortality. A pinched nerve in his neck kept his average under 300 for the first time in his career. And in early 1960, his troubled younger brother Danny died of leukemia at the age of 39.
My father had no insurance or income or anything. Ted paid for everything, and my father was getting, you know, blood transfusions and air ambulances. His family and his good deeds he didn't want to talk about. You know, and I think Ted felt that it's my brother and there's nothing I can do and I've done everything I can. You know, it's hard. It was the end of a story for him, too.
To some, retirement seemed imminent. But as ever, the splendid Splinter had his own plan.
He was 41 years old, and he went into Dick O'Connell's office, the general manager. $125,000 contract there on O'Connell's desk. And he said, there it is, Ted, same as last year. And Ted said, no, Mr. O'Connell, I am playing one more year, and I'm going to play it for $90,000. What I made last year, I did not deserve. That's the way he felt about the whole realm of being the greatest hitter who ever lived.
I interviewed a blind man at Fenway Park. He was sitting along the first base line. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'd like to ask you, why do you come to the ballpark? Because, you know. And he says, I come for Ted Williams. I said, why? He says, I can tell when Williams stands up in the dugout, when he takes his bat out of the rack, when he's getting in the on-base circle. I can tell every move he makes by the reaction of the fans.
And in the 1960 season, the hitter was reborn. Batting over 300, slugging his 500th home run, and providing one of the most dramatic final bows in sports history.
Quite a touching sight. Everyone standing at Fenway Park as Williams hit probably for the last time in a Boston uniform in this ballpark.
I looked for a fastball, and I got a gee with a ball to hit. And I swung, and I couldn't believe I didn't make contact.
Swing and a miss, and he took a mighty cut.
I thought, boy, how did I miss that?
Well, you can bet your bottom dollar Williams would like to hit one out of here right now.
I was watching Fisher, and he couldn't wait to get the ball to the catcher. And I said, he thinks he threw it by me. And he threw it in the same spot, same speed.
There's a drive to deep right center. This may be gone. Bradley back there watching. Home run, Ted Williams.
I'll never forget that one for sure. It's the closest time I ever come to tip my hat after playing for 22 years.
And he said, as I rounded the bases, I thought about tipping my cap. He says, but I couldn't do it because, as he put it, I was done with that part of the act.
and the crowd simply will not stop applauding here at Fenway Park in Boston.
They all were hollering for me to come out. I didn't go back out for acknowledgement of the applause, but I had to go out for the next inning. When I got out there, looked around, and I'd already been replaced.
The manager replaced Ted so he could run in and get an ovation. I was standing at shortstop, so Ted was running from left field, and he got across shortstop on the way to the dugout. And he said to me, "Isn't this a crock?"
He got in a car, he drove underneath the grandstand, out through the center field fence, just so he could duck us. And this is the biggest story of the year, Ted's last game. Hits a home run. How do you feel? What about? He's gone. He got even with us. That was his revenge.
The big news story of the past 7 days was not Mr. Khrushchev or the presidential campaign. It was the news out of Boston that Mr. Ted Williams had retired as an active ball player for the Boston Red Sox. It seems that at 42, he was too old. It does show that perhaps experience doesn't count.
Six years after his retirement, in 1966, Williams was inducted into the Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility.
I received 280-odd votes from the writers, and I know I didn't have 280-odd close friends among the writers.
Now, I grew up in a household where my father shopped at Sears. And you'd get the Sears catalog at home. I'd flip to the baseball thing. Here's Ted Williams' shoe, Ted Williams' glove, Ted Williams' bat. I used to ask my dad, I said, "Dad, who's Ted Williams? Who's this guy?" And I know for a lot of people, that's where you got your first glimpse of Ted Williams. Who's this guy, you know, with the fishing hat on and the fishing pole in the Sears catalog?
Williams did not stay idle in retirement for long, signing a lucrative deal with Sears Roebuck & Company that turned the kid into more than a baseball great. He was now also America's master fisherman. It was a good fit. If the science of hitting forever appealed to Williams, he found similar satisfaction in another exercise in precision: catching a fish.
Being in a boat with him was, I think, an exercise in discovery of Ted Williams, because his frustrations would come out, his joy would come out, his happiness when he got the fish. Those times he could be the adorable and rambunctious and sometimes very critical kid, more so than any other place. There's no inhibitions there. You know, he's not having to prove himself to anybody. And I think that that's where the real personality came out.
He would stand for hours. You couldn't sit down in the boat. You had to remain standing. I don't know what the reason for this was, but he remained standing.
Williams had fallen for Chicago socialite Lee Howard at the end of his playing days and married her in 1961. But even in love, Ted Williams could be as scornful and difficult as ever.
He would just go into these tirades of swearing, and like a firecracker blew up. It was never anything physical except hitting things, but never people. He would rip the telephone out of the wall and then ask me to call the phone company to have the phone fixed. Well, I did this about 5 times. I felt like I was forever having to handle things with kid gloves. You were afraid to make a move, afraid of setting them off. And I just couldn't live that way. I loved the man very much, but the life was for him and not for anybody else.
The marriage lasted less than 5 years, but he quickly found himself walking down the aisle yet again. The third Mrs. Ted Williams was Dolores Weddick, a Vogue model and actress. Soon came a son, John Henry, and 3 years later, a daughter, Claudia. But another chance at fatherhood didn't make Williams any easier to deal with as a husband. And this wife battled back.
It was like two chemicals hitting each other in the chemistry lab. I mean, it either was an explosion or a wonderful creation.
Listen, if you go 3 days with him, you're lucky. That's it. The honeymoon's over after 3 days. Then the fights start, and then he acts like a little boy, and you love him all over again. And then it's smooth rolling again, and whoops, then there you go again.
The pattern repeated for 6 years before ending in another divorce. Williams was done with marriage, but was able to find lasting companionship in an old friend named Louise Kaufman.
She had waited for him through 2 wives before they finally got together. With Louise, she could hold her ground, and did.
She'd make me so damn mad. I said, damn you, and she said, yeah, you go ahead and hit me, I'll kill you. It's a little fiery Scotchman, terrific gal.
But I think she also had another quality that was essential, and that is that she could overlook and overlook and overlook.
It was hard to keep up with his emotions. But you needed to be a duck and let that water roll off your back. And it took a while to learn that. Of course, it's tough for a little kid to get yelled at, and then 5 minutes later, we get one of these, meaning I want a kiss from you, and everything's fine. And John Henry and I, no doubt, were in that boat. We rode every storm with him.
I think he loved all his kids, but he didn't like to be accountable to anybody, and he very quickly, I think, got tired of any parental kind of role, and he liked to control his situation, and kids aren't part of a controlled situation.
Everything that he did was broken down to a science, right down to playing a game. There was a serious side to it that we all tried to figure out pretty quick. I mean, it was always a competition, which is great for little kids growing up because all we wanted to do was impress our dad.
And it may have been the most daunting task of all for the legend's only son.
I think Ted loved the idea of having a son more than having a son, in a way. And I think John Henry had a tough time growing up with this alternating no father figure, and then when he got a father figure, a ferocious father figure.
As family life grew more complicated, Williams made a return to the familiar, the ballpark. He had been on the outskirts of the baseball world for nearly a decade, when in 1969, he accepted the job as manager of the Washington Senators.
There was a time when you were considered hard-headed. Aren't you kind of like the flying ace who becomes the colonel? You now have to deal with equally hard-headed fellows.
Well, you know, the funny thing of it is, when you fellows all bring up the point about controversial, you always bring that word in. Funny thing of it is that I was supposedly a controversial fellow in a lot of ways, but still I never had any trouble with a manager that I played for, and I'm positive that I'm not going to have any trouble with these boys, I think, with me.
Thank you. The word controversial you brought up. I didn't say
controversial. You just said controversial
did
ahead
I
of
say
me.
Controversial?
Sure you did.
No,
sure you did.
I thought I had managed to avoid that
No,
word.
you said controversial.
Gosh, you beat me to it then.
I'm sure you said controversial. Play it back.
What's the matter with John?
He was named American League Manager of the Year after his first season, but soon tired of teaching players who didn't have his talent and quit the job in 1972. He would, however, continue to make periodic returns to his old confines at Fenway.
Taken by Williams. Ted Williams with the catch.
Last night, his number 9 and Joe Cronin's number 4 were officially retired.
And as the years passed, memories of the petulant and combative star seemed to fade, replaced by images of an aging folk hero.
Became campaign for me up in New Hampshire. It's like I was walking along with a rock star.
who's this guy with Williams, you know, that kind of thing. It's a special honor to have the privilege of presenting the nation's highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
The longer he was away from Boston and the longer he was away from the game, the more affection there was for him around here.
I tip my hat to all the people in New England.
Baseball came around, Boston came around, even the writers came around. By his later life, he was revered.
Well, I wanted to make a baseball movie for many, many years because baseball had been such a big part of my life.
Number 11. That's a bad luck number. Don't go into that.
What about 9?
9? Well, you got me.
I had the number 9 that I wore that I was dedicating to Ted. I just had him in my head as the perfect character to pattern myself after in terms of hitting and determination and the ability to block things out and focus on just what you were there for. It was just an homage to someone that I had respected and idolized much of my life, and it was a chance to really bring that to a close. He wrote me a very nice note. He was very complimentary, very nice, and I said, well, he can't be too complimentary because he hasn't met me. You know, I could be a dork. I wanted him to come on the set so I could just shake his hand, but he was too busy fishing.
He was kind of in his Father Christmas phase where he was really gregarious and nice. Had we been peers, I think he would have hated me. I certainly would have been lumped in with the writers that he didn't like. But in 1993, my daughter, who was 8, Kate was 8 years old, was diagnosed with leukemia. She was in Children's Hospital. Ted's son had been trying to get me to write about, I think he was opening a store or something like that. And I got back to him. I explained the family situation. And within a few minutes, the phone was ringing.
I answered, and it was just this loud, booming voice, and I had no idea who it was. So I just passed the phone off to my dad and said, Daddy, there's a loud man on the phone telling me everything's gonna be okay.
I didn't give him any phone numbers, and he got right through. I'm sure he had a pipeline to Children's Hospital. I was in the worst profession in the world as far as he was concerned, but I was just the guy whose daughter had cancer. And it was just, how's that little girl? Let's talk about Kate. You know, is she playing? Can she hit?
We just sort of bonded when I was a little kid, and then he would just check in on how I was doing, and was I playing softball, and could I hit? And that was just all he cared about, was just that I was able to do what I love to do.
Ted had a lot of feeling for kids in trouble. I think the Jimmy Fund was all about that. But that didn't really mean that he spent a lot of time with his own kids.
The relationship between Williams and his 3 children had remained uneven as they had grown older. But as he reached his 70s, things changed. His longtime companion, Louise Kaufman, passed away, and he suffered a series of debilitating strokes that ultimately robbed him of much of his vision. Suddenly, there was room for John Henry Williams in his father's life.
He realized at that point, I'm going to take care of Dad. And not only taking care of Dad, but also managing him as a Hall of Fame baseball player, someone who people sought an autograph from. Just making sure that the people that Dad wanted around him would be around him.
John Henry, you know, ran the house, had attendants, had hired cooks, and with the memorabilia market going, enlisted his father to make appearances, to sign things, to keep the bucks rolling in.
I think he wanted John Henry to succeed, and John Henry really was overshadowed by Ted and wanted to be another Ted, but he never could measure up as an athlete. And so he surrounded himself with memorabilia and kind of liked to be the go-to guy for Ted.
People didn't like John Henry, the business people, those who had dealt with him. and everybody seemed to have an end with a bad relationship, and it just was epidemic. And Ted never saw it. And again, his vision wasn't very good, and John was running his life for him.
There's a debate about how much Ted wanted to sign and how much John Henry wanted Ted to sign. And Ted, at different points, complained to people that he was working real hard. It seemed excessive to a lot of people that were around it, and on a couple occasions it seemed excessive to Ted, too, I guess.
No one, and you can get me on tape saying this right here, no one asked Ted Williams to do anything he didn't want to do. Doesn't matter what it was. Signing a baseball, going to some function, screw you and the boat you showed up on. I ain't doing it if I don't want to do it.
It looks like John Henry was taking advantage of his father's name. But the part that I think is too often missed is that John Henry was there for him. Despite everything, I think Ted truly appreciated that. He says, he's a pain in the ass, but I love him.
To his credit, he spent a lot of time with his father. It wasn't a barrel of laughs those last 10 years. Getting him in the shower, dressing him. And John was there. I believe he was a loving son. I do. I think he had some weird ideas, but I do believe he loved his dad.
What a perfect way to wind down this millennium with an all-star game here at Fenway Park.
In July of 1999, many of baseball's all-time greats were honored in Boston. And the kid, who had captivated the city for 6 decades, took center stage at home one more time.
I found out that he was really nervous about how people were going to react. I mean, you're Ted Williams. This is Boston. He was really concerned about that. And that night, they let him know how they felt about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, he wore the Red Sox uniform for 22 years. He was the last man to hit 400 in a season, and he did it 58 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the greatest hitter that ever lived, number 9, Ted Williams.
If you had a ticket, you had the best seat in the house. I don't care where you sat. That was the greatest.
It's all about this pageantry and this big gala, and here's some of the greats of all time are there, and then he came on, and it was like the needle just scratched off the record, and it was like, wow.
It was a wonderful scene, wasn't it? Because you could see that he didn't expect it. I think what really touched him was the players coming around and gathering at his knee.
And they were like little kids with these wide eyes, almost like they were talking to Santa Claus, right in the middle of Fenway Park.
We try as hard as we can and hope that this moment translates on television.
It was very difficult to speak after that. And I remember specifically the producer telling me in my ear, okay, your mic's open. Your mic's open. And I'm up there going, I can't make any noises right now.
He's like, where's the kid? And he was looking for me, and I'm like, Ted, I'm right here.
My man, right here. You're gonna be everybody's man, boy.
I was just taking it all in. I was just going, wow, this is just the coolest thing, greatest thing. This is, you know, savor it. Don't ever forget it.
You could see no one wanted to leave. You know, McGuire and Gwynn, they were around him, you know, these legendary people trying to get their moment with Ted.
He asked Mark McGuire if he smelled burnt wood when he was hitting. Just a typical. Ted is in the cart, and everybody's going over and saying hello. How you doing, Mr. Williams? Good to see you, Mr. Williams. And Mark McGuire comes up. How you doing, Mr. Williams? Mark, hey, Mark. You ever smell burnt wood when you were hitting? Typical Ted Williams.
Ted Williams is the pitcher. Carlton Fitz is the catcher.
When he was getting ready to throw out the first pitch that night, I'm the guy standing there listening to him. You know, he's like, Tony, where's home plate?
Where is he? Right there. Oh, all right.
He didn't know where the hell he was throwing it. He was just throwing it, and he threw it right to Carl.
Wow, what a greeting that was. You say to you, well, the ball game's over. Did I win or lose? And what what was the score, and I think this told them that he had won.
That was like the official goodbye visit. You knew this was a guy that had trouble, and this was the city's chance to say goodbye.
The last years of Daddy's life, there was no doubt in my mind, nothing more important than spending time with his children.
After the appearance at Fenway, Williams began to suffer more serious heart problems, and following surgery, his health declined further.
Dominic and I went to see him. Dominic is talking to him. He says, "Johnny's here." What is he? So he's looking around, and I'm over here in the corner, and I got in front of him. When I saw him, I almost cried. It was so sad.
The saddest part of my life with Ted Williams was seeing it at the hospital in the final days. And I don't even think he knew who I was. And then a few weeks later, they took him back to Florida where he passed away.
It's 12:47 now on BZ News. Top stories at this hour. Baseball Hall of Famer and Red Sox legend Ted Williams has died.
We had the tribute to him at Fenway Park. Some of the other older guys are there, and the reception he got was just amazing.
I lost a friend. When he passed away, I lost a friend for sure.
In Florida, the great baseball player Ted Williams' will was made public. It clearly requests that he be cremated. The executor claims that Williams changed his mind before he died and wanted to be frozen.
Based on what I know and believe, after the time of his will, Ted chose to have his body cryonically preserved.
Somewhere in this Scottsdale, Arizona cryonics laboratory may be baseball's greatest hitter, Ted Williams, suspended in liquid nitrogen at 320 degrees below zero.
Within hours of his death, John Henry had transported his father's body to a place called Alcor to be frozen and preserved.
Bobby Joe, how are you doing? How are you doing? All right.
Older daughter Bobby Joe, long estranged from her siblings, fiercely and publicly objected, claiming fraud and citing a 1996 version of her father's will that stated he wanted to be cremated and his ashes spread over the Florida Keys. But an oil-stained piece of paper John Henry produced claimed it was Williams' final wish that perhaps one day science would reunite him with his son and daughter Claudia, and that they too would undergo the procedure upon death. A public uproar ensued. In the end, the court upheld John Henry's version of the will, and Ted Williams remains in Scottsdale, Arizona.
What I would say first and foremost about my father's passing is this: that is an extremely private family matter, and it should have never, ever been a part of a media scandal. We know what our father wanted.
In a sad epilogue, John Henry Williams died 2 years after his father of leukemia at age 35. Though Alcor and the family won't confirm it, it is presumed his remains have also been cryonically frozen.
I feel like people are trying to break me. It's like something's going to click now that they're both gone. I'm going to say something different. Well, I'm not. We all believed in science, and that is our personal choice. It is what holds us together, what gives us hope, and if you will, that is our faith.
If you were to go talk to anyone on the street and say, Ted Williams, oh, is that the frozen guy? Always. Not Ted Williams, a great hitter, Ted Williams, the war hero, Ted Williams, the fisherman. No, Ted Williams, the frozen guy. That's the sadness. That's the impact.
It's unfortunate in my view that Ted became a punchline in death. But I do think as years go on, there's less association with that. This was something that I believe his son did, some kooky idea, and it's a family matter, and we're all on the outside looking in.
People will remember Ted Williams the way they want to remember Ted Williams. And if they want to remember him because of the way he died, then fine. Or if they want to remember him for all the greatness that he did in life, that's fine too. But as far as what we decided as a family, remains a family decision.
And the 400 hitter of today at the plate, Ted Williams. There's a high drive going deep, deep. It is a home run.
Oh, what a great thrill to see him hit that ball, my gosh. Few people come through this world like a Ted Williams.
He was a great teammate. He was a great leader. God, he was an utterly amazing man. I'll never forget him.
For a man who had shown a flair for endings in his baseball life, his death was one more dramatic goodbye. After so many years spent at odds with his family, his public, and himself, so many years of fierce contradictions and ferocious standards, he had said all he wanted was to have them say he was the greatest hitter of all time. But of course, nothing with Ted Williams could ever have been that simple.
I think that Boston increasingly embraced Ted Williams, so that at the end, not only could they appreciate him, but he could appreciate them.
I think he qualifies as an American hero because he was an individualist. He was strong and opinionated, and he was John Wayne, you know? I mean, Ted was the ultimate man's man. I don't know if that's all a good thing in modern society, but he was.
Guys who play the game today, is kind of their responsibility to talk about the heroes of the game, and Ted definitely was one of those. Teddy was a good man, I can tell you that. He's a good man.
Ted, you really have to give him his size. I mean, he was a force, and there was a force that boiled up from him. Some took it kindly and thought him a god. Some took it ill and thought, what makes this guy think he's so great? But nobody could miss it.
Like a feather caught in a vortex, Williams ran around the square of bases at the center of our beseeching screaming. He ran as he always ran out home runs, hurriedly, unsmiling, head down, as if our praise were a storm of rain to get out of. He didn't tip his cap. Our noise for some seconds passed beyond excitement into a kind of immense open anguish, a wailing, a cry to be saved. But immortality is non-transferable. Even the umpires on the field begged him to come out and acknowledge us in some way. But he never had and did not now. Gods did not answer letters.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports.